stuff. So we are now officially recording. Welcome to our final of the 4 webinars that we were going to be doing. This one all about the OODA, as I like to say, OODA loop, metrics and winning. Really putting some practices into place to help you engage your team members in improving your business. Because oftentimes it can feel like, and not just feel like, actually be a one-man show or a one-woman show, depending on who's running the job site. And you really want to get your team members involved in that. And so OODA is just a great tool to use to do that. So Wayne, if you want to give a quick overview of what OODA is, and then Nick and I are going to jump in and talk a little bit about metrics, and then we're going to come back to OODA and how it really applies.
Sure. OODA, as we're making the acronym into a word here, the OODA concept has its roots in the military training and in law enforcement training, but it can easily be applied to business and learning environments too. Interesting thing, most of the concepts, and this is not unique to the OODA concept, but many concepts are not unfamiliar to business owners. You're probably using some of these same techniques. You just didn't know what they were called or whether there was some formal structure behind some of the operations. So if that describes you, this might just be an encouragement that what you're doing, and I presume it's working, is legitimate. Maybe we can fine tune it. It certainly helps build a framework for explaining it to our employees, and the fact that the government, military, and law enforcement and business are using this gives us some legitimacy. We found that the OODA concept, or the OODA loop, or the loop as I'll refer to it, is particularly beneficial in terms of 5S and lean concepts like we've had trained in ZF and last week in our webinar. The concept of OODA is that it creates a forced environment where businesses can face challenges and create growth. And it's a tool that we use to overcome raw emotion in the decision-making process and be able to act quickly and decisively in the face of ever-changing environments. Our company relied heavily on OODA, or the loop, during the ongoing and recent COVID situation. I don't want to give COVID any more press time than it already has taken. So I want to expand the concept and say that the OODA concept works in any kind of a crisis situation, environments where business is changing for whatever reason, and we're hoping that you'll pick up some techniques that will be beneficial for crisis management as well. The entire OODA idea is wrapped around the concept of updating and revising your business strategy in an evolving environment, and being able to make speedy decisions that are competitive and flexible. And it was originally started by United States Air Force Colonel and a military strategist, John Boyd, is the father of the F-16. And yes, there is a street on Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama that has the OODA loop street sign. Somebody asked about that. Go ahead.
No, that's just the OODA loop sign. I was like, where did you find that? But you found it. And I will tell you, and Nick and I will, kind of talk about this as we're going along, but Sashco has another name for OODA, for the loop, PDCA, plan, do, check, and adjust. And it's something that over the last, probably 5 or 6 years, we've really started to implement more routinely and consistently here at Sashco. And it's really helped us for times when, COVID hit, or as we've been dealing with this year, raw materials, supply shortages. And we take the time to stop and understand it before we move along and make any sort of changes. So that kind of takes me to the next bit. Who cares about the loop? Who cares about OODA? Here's what happens today. And Nick, speak up as we're going through this. Most people, owners, crew leads, your kids, we start at act. Or we might do observe and then act. We skip a couple of the pieces in that loop. And what happens is fixes are not standardized or sustained. If your crew even has ideas on things that should be done, or your crew says nothing, they're like, not my problem, or I'm afraid to speak up or whatever, and nothing, they rely on you to do all of the fixing. And you're not engaging the KSAs, and we talked about that last week, just a little bit, the knowledge, skills, and abilities of your team members. And so if ACT is where we default, how can you get into the rest of the loop, the OOD habit?
Yeah, I think the place that I think I often start, our team often starts, is I have a great idea to fix this problem, and oftentimes the problem isn't stated. It's, wow, we should do this promotion, we should do this discount, and so we don't really get to the point of understanding the problem. When you really understand the problem, which is, I think, starting at the observe, then the conviction to see that solution, to solve that problem, to see that solution all the way through is there. A recent example, so we have a stain sampling program, and one of our inside sales people, Renee, was saying, and she actually owns that program. She owns that process. And we'll talk about that maybe a little bit later. But she said, we're losing a lot of money because we're sending duplicate stain samples to the same person a lot. And they are often getting the wrong samples because they don't know whether to get transformation or capture. And so we took the time to say, well, we think there's a problem. Let's go look. And we found that 17% of people were ordering duplicate samples. And if we could solve this problem, it would save us, not counting labor, just in shipping costs and whatnot, about 10 grand per year. If we could solve that problem, take that 17% down to like 8%. So I think it's human nature to start at that. Let's do this promotion and we're going to do this cool thing. Well, what does it solve? What's the current state? And if we can slow down, then we can speed up the improvement and follow it through to the end.
With you guys, it might be more, we really need to get a chink machine because it takes a lot of time to chink, and that's slowing down our jobs and this and that. Well, is it really that you need a chink machine, or are there improvements to the chinking process that you can make? And you don't know until you stop and take a step back and observe. So to that end, what should you observe? This is where you start measuring. And so I want to just quickly, before we move on, hey, Mark, thanks for the picture from your Facebook. I saw that the other day and I was like, oh, that's kind of perfect.
Is it? That's not a knife. This is a knife.
So I want to take a step back and say thank you to Wayne for his idea for this webinar. And it dovetailed very nicely with some work that we've been doing here at Sashco for several years, and that Wayne's been doing for several years at his business. So thank you for the great idea, Wayne, and for sharing that. And it's so, when we have business focus, when we started here with our stain sampling program, anything, as Wayne often says, if it's worth doing, it's worth measuring. But sometimes you're like, what the heck should I measure? Well, you start simple and you just start measuring numbers. You start putting numbers down on a piece of paper. Make sure though it's tied to the work that you and your crew are doing. So you start, and this is just a start, by measuring activities. Complete on time at the job, cycle reduction. How long does it take to chink a line? How long does it take to blast just one wall for us, how many phone calls are we going to be making to people? You just start measuring numbers. We measure on-time calls. You guys probably measure on time to the job site. Back in our factory, we measure the number of improvements each day. Focus on the drivers, not the results. So what are you doing to get work done versus what is the profit, at least to start with? Because those, and some of those numbers, I'm just going to be frank with you, at the end of the day may mean nothing at all. But until you start writing something down, putting some numbers to something, and trying to get the insights out of it, that's when you'll start refining and finding the numbers that do make sense.
And I would add that if this is about improvement, because I think that's what we're here for, and that could mean a whole lot of things. But if it's about improvement, it's not just about measuring, it's about making those measurements visible. Because the minute that you make them visible, you have the ability to get engagement from the team higher than when you ever had it before. Oh my gosh. It's
Yeah,
like,
I have a whole slide on it.
I'm sorry. It was a great segue. It's like we planned it. No, but I think what we saw in our business, and I feel like it continues to be something we work on for sure. But I remember having a lot of these measurements on, I'm a spreadsheet nerd. So, let's get that out of the way first. And I would put together these spreadsheets and it would be sitting on my desk and then I would send it to people. Well, where do you think the ownership was? It wasn't with the people that I sent the spreadsheets to, it was with me. I was looking at it, I was owning it. And so we try to get the measurement, whatever we choose to measure, onto some objective place that is not owned by the boss or the owner, so that it becomes something that actually the team member can own and can work on. So we use whiteboards, we use Power BI. It's a Microsoft software to visualize data. And that way it's not something that I'm doing, but it's something that the team member is doing. But that's a kind of an important insight. It's not just about getting measurements and understanding. It's about the transfer of ownership from just the owner or the boss to the entire team so that you work on something together. You see where you start and you see the improvement happen. And that's an OODA loop that you can get excited about.
Mm-hmm. And I guess what I piggyback on there, and Wayne, feel free to chime in here too. One big piece of culture change here at Sashco that had to take place was a conversation about the default needs to be, it's the process, not the people. It's the process, not the people. Sometimes we all know it is the people, but you jump from observe and act, and the easiest thing to go to is it's a problem with the person, and it leaves out the opportunity, and I do say opportunity, to find a better way to do something. Perhaps there's a way to train people better so that they understand it. And when you make that culture shift to looking at the process, you really bring your team into the business of improvement. And that's something that you can't put a price tag on. When everybody is trying to find better ways to do things, your efficiencies and profit go up tremendously. I mean, Sashco has doubled almost in the last, 6 years, Nick?
Yeah, that's about right.
About 6 years. And we couldn't have done it if we didn't stop the blaming and the finger pointing. We're all very good at that naturally as human beings, and started instead looking at our processes and trying to make our processes better and giving ownership of those processes to the people who are doing it. Leadership team doesn't sit at a boardroom table anymore saying this is how you need to do things.
And so, yeah, and like, you can imagine why this is important, but it sounds kind of conceptual until one day you decide, guys, we really need to measure how quickly we're prepping this wood. Mm-hmm. And we may have multiple crews. And all of a sudden you're making visible blasting rates per hour, chinking rates per lineal foot or per hour, whatever it is. And all of a sudden it's visible. So what's the first thing is people get defensive. In fact, we had a meeting today in which we're going through a sales process, and we were looking and having discipline to look at the customers, the homeowners that we were trying to talk to and that got lost in the process. And so we had to reiterate it again today. Guys, what can we learn about this? We don't initially assume that John is better than Jim at chinking because the rates are better. I mean, maybe that's true, but we have to look at the process. What is John doing that Jim can learn from, and basically say, let's not be defensive about this. This is about improvement. And ultimately, improvement is about finding places that you're not very good or it could be better. And so that's a big, big deal. If I don't know, and Wayne, you can maybe talk to this, but the minute you take off the covers, so to speak, or make things visible of what's going on, defensiveness in the team is a natural reaction. And it's our job as leaders to preempt that and to say, we are not going to get defensive because we're here to create excellence. And any place we're not creating excellence is an opportunity that we can go and correct that. So gather with me and let's get this done.
So Wayne will be going into how he's engaged his teams on that, especially recently. So we've been talking about, okay, start to identify some things to measure, make it visible, get your team involved in identifying that. So when does the OODA loop, when does a loop come in? Well, before we move on, you have paper there. If you have been thinking of ideas in these last 15 minutes while we've been talking about metrics of things that you think you could start measuring, write it down. I'm going to tell you that. When you have ideas, write it down. We talked about visible, write it down. And what is your plan for getting your team involved? Write it down before you get. Because now, when you have those ideas, this is when the OODA loop is really going to come in handy. That becomes a tool in your arsenal. I've got this that I'm measuring. Okay, now we're going to start to really observe what we're measuring. We're going to orient to it. And then we'll decide and then we'll act. So Wayne's going to go into that in much more depth, but please write that stuff down or, speak it into your phone. Notes, I know how that goes. But make it a goal to by the end of May, we've got 3.5 weeks, 4 weeks left of May. Here are the things that I think we should start measuring. I'm going to go to my guys and we're going to spend, half an hour, 45 minutes talking about what we should measure. I'm going to write it down. And then I'm going to learn from what Wayne is about to go through with OODA and start to implement some of the stuff during your busiest time of the year where you can find the most improvements because you're doing it day in and day out all the time. Are you ready, Wayne?
Oh yeah, I'm ready.
He's ready.
One thing I'd like to say before Wayne jumps in here, sorry, is just, and I'm sorry, I'm not sorry. But when we go back to the metrics and in the first slide, one thing that I remember our COO saying, Tim Marhofer, who a lot of you guys met at Business Focus, you don't increase sales by measuring sales. Right. So we talked about that a little bit in the last webinar of this, preoccupation with sales. What we do is we look at what's our best driver of sales, or what's our best driver of cost per job, of reducing that, whatever your metric is. And then that's what we create the metric around. If we really drive improvement in this area, do we believe that sales will increase or profitability will increase or whatever the end goal is? And that's what the metric should be, connected to the work that we're actually doing every day. And then all of a sudden you look up at the end of the year and you go, crud, we really, if we improve this, we really increase sales. That's just I think that's somewhat obvious, but I just wanted to mention that's important. I call them drivers, essentially, causal metrics, things that cause the results. And that's what we should be paying attention to.
Right. Jared, great question. And we'll, when we open up things at the end for Q&A and open forum, we're going to be talking about that. And Wayne's going to be going into some examples of things that they track. We will go into some examples of what we at Sashco track as well. So it's a great question. We will get back to that at the end. So Wayne, jump in and get us familiar with the loop.
Okay. We said before, the background of the loop is military, Colonel Boyd. The loop, the concept of the OODA loop was a complete departure for the United States Air Force and for law enforcement, because it has taken and shifted the action model away from a centralized command and control model, which the military is known for. Now, the impetus for this was Colonel Boyd was an F-86 aircraft pilot in the Korean War, and the knockdown rate between the F-86 jet that he flew and the Korean MiG-15s was a rate of about 10-1, knocking them out of the sky at a tremendous rate. It caught the note of the authorities or of the people in charge, because technically the MiG-15 is a much more superior aircraft. It's got better acceleration, better climb rates. There's no reason the F-86, which was relatively slow, could have such a high kill rate. So Colonel Boyd assessed his experiences in aviation air dogfights and made the observation that in this case, the F-86 had a hydraulic control system. It could transition faster from one maneuver to another. The canopy was larger. We had better observation, better able to see what's going on. And he digested some of these components of the two different aircrafts and determined the F-86 was a more agile aircraft, which in our application, as we go through the OODA loop, agile is a key word for us, because as business owners, we have to respond to crisis management. We have to respond to things that are jumping up in front of us quickly. Our companies are small enough that if we process the information following the OODA loop, we can be much more agile, solve problems quickly, whether they're COVID related or whether it's some other crisis. The danger that Nick mentioned is that we tend to jump into some of these steps in a disordered framework, or sometimes skip steps. It's real easy to meet people that have lots of great ideas, but they want to hurry up and act, and they don't really decide all of the consequences or make a qualified decision. Sometimes people get excited about things they hear or they observe someone else doing, and they decide they're going to implement it into their company, and they don't orient themselves to be able to make that work. So this is a balanced approach. Let's look at each step in detail. We'll see how we've applied this in other small businesses like ours. In business, we spend time in SWOT, observation and elevation or evaluation, SWOT. That's looking at something in terms of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. I'm not going to read these because you can read a lot faster, and it's a lot more interesting for those of you that aren't driving down the highway to read this, but I'm going to add things to it. That is that the observe step is the first, and it's one of the more critical steps in the OODA loop. Deciding and acting is relatively straightforward once you've done the observation and figured out how you're going to make things fit into your situation or fit into your company. The 4 steps of the OODA loop are not equal. They're not co-equal. Observe and orient, I believe, are the more important steps for companies like ours that want to grow. You can read through through my notes there. In our case, being a small company, the whole COVID thing was scary. We didn't know who to believe. None of us did. The media was giving us different stories. The authorities were inconsistent. The observations were incongruent. Our customers were scared. I have employees that are scared. I have families of employees that are scared. And at that point in time, that's the point where we need systemized thinking to, as we refer to order our thoughts, as opposed to our thoughts being disordered, and make sense of what's going on and reflect in our company decisions what it means to look at those opportunities, the strengths and weaknesses of a situation, the threats to your business, observe, spend a little time opening your eyes and trying to be accurate in your assessment of how they go. This allows us to get inside of the problem, own the problem, and it creates a faster, what we call transient rhythm. The small companies that can pay attention, and by paying attention, I'm saying observe, are obviously going to make more qualified decisions that are proper, fewer mistakes. It's going to lead to a much better result. With in the realm of lean and 5S, I'm not going to try to repeat Tim's explanation of that because he does a wonderful job of it. Get to business focus if you can, or get the last week's webinar and kind of get a summary of that. But the way that information has been applied in my company and the way we've used this and this SWOT observation, I'm in the business of selling time. We do log home restoration, we do a lot of things, but my job as owner, I'm actually what I refer to as a value-added reseller of time. If you're manufacturing something, you've got a product, you can look at it, you can identify what it costs to make a tube of goo and how much time it spends in this department or that department. And if you're a retailer, you know what it costs to buy something, and then you can do your math and kind of watch things. In our case, all I have to offer is expertise, and I market that in the realm of time. So our approach to using OODA to deal with COVID and to run our company consistently is everything has a time base for me. I buy time from my employees. I buy time from them, and I pay them for their time. I do what I can to add value to that time and find a way to sell it for something more than it cost me to acquire. So my product, unlike a tube of goo or a product on a store shelf, is I'm selling time. I'm a value-added reseller of time. Charisse made reference to Michael Dell's quote of Dell Computers, and this is one that I say a lot. I've often said if I had a tattoo, I'd probably have this tattoo. Michael Dell made the observation that anything worth doing can be measured. Think about that. Anything worth doing can be measured. We'll talk in a few moments in open forum. We measure how much time it takes to blast the wall. We measure how long it takes to stir a bucket. Everything we do, every step, every process, every system, for me, has a time base. Time is money, because I also collect pictures of dead presidents. So time allows me to do that. So we basically break everything down into finding ways to look at our strengths, look at our weaknesses, look for opportunities to get more done in less time. What are the threats to our time? This picture of the fire brigade, sometimes we get going so fast that we're slopping things out of our systems and out of our businesses, and we hope to make it up in just working harder and harder. Obviously, if we slow down and we're more careful, we look at things from a point of being observant, that allow us to make more money and to live a happier life. Michael Dell's comment was actually in its entirety, anything worth doing can be measured, and anything that can be measured can be improved. Pretty simple, but it's pretty true. I don't have the ability to change screens. Yes.
Yeah, just I just was thinking about the systems that are in place to observe. I did some in my past some financial counseling for people, and I'm basically budgeting. And the first thing that we would do is get something that we could observe, i.e., how much did you spend last month, right? And I remember I lived in New York, and I did some financial counseling for high schoolers in the Bronx. And I put together sample budgets, sample observations, and they could make the correct decision every single time. And they were juniors and seniors in high school, right? So my thought process is, and to your point about observing being one of the most important things, what are we doing for our teams to help them observe, and also to help them observe something that's objective, not just, oh, well, that's what Wayne thinks. Wayne said we need to blast faster. Wayne said that we're not doing it quick enough, right? So how do that observation, can it be something that's objective? It's in a reporting system, or this is like an infrastructure piece in where I'm going with this. But anyway, I was just thinking about, what are we using to create the observations for our team? So,
Well, a recent one for me anyway is like, as I'll try to answer that briefly, and how it relates to orienting. We said, for example, we measure square footage. You can't measure just one job. You have to measure a number of projects and then work up averages. I know that in our case, a qualified blaster moving glass media, not counting mask time or prep or setup, we're going to churn out 225 or 250 square feet an hour on an average. And I felt pretty good about that until I talked to Mark last week and found out that he's knocking out 500 square feet. So, okay, guys, here's somebody who's found a way to go faster. Our observations can be so biased based on our background, our experience, our culture, our opinions, that it's a constant effort to open our eyes. And it does point fingers back at all of us as leaders when we find out that we've been assuming things. And if we can encourage our teams to observe and orient ourselves and our companies to match that observation, we're all going to do better. So as we said earlier, I think Alicia might have been the one that had the question about, or we'll get to this later, I'm sure, the competitiveness and the defensiveness. This isn't the team versus the owner. We run an open books management system, which I'm not going to go into, but we are very direct with our team. We're in this as a group. If the guy quoting it doesn't quote it right, the guy doing the blasting can't be held accountable for that. We pass or fail, succeed or fail as a team. So that's how we keep the ownership kind of qualified, and we don't, we orient ourselves to the observations we make. Did that answer your question, Nick, at all? So dance around it.
yeah, no, that's good. I just, yeah, that's good.
Well, there's no doubt that, oh, go ahead.
So I think that especially when it comes to the stage of observe, we have the tendency to be a Baptist church committee. Well, we've never done it like that before. And so we try to force ourselves into doing the same thing, just faster or better. And so here at Sashco, what we've gotten into what we're trying to get into the habit of, and we're getting better at it, we're not there yet, is writing down and really, as part of the observation, what are the must-haves? What do I have? What has to be part of this solution? What is it that I absolutely have to deliver? Let's go through that. When we do a process map, you have to write down everything that you're doing now and be totally honest about it and say, that's a waste of time. That's a throwaway. You have to look at everything very frankly and not be afraid to throw things out that, we may have been doing for 30 years because it's not the better way. And that hold that very loosely.
So we're going to observe what's going on around us, business opportunities, strengths, weaknesses, an honest assessment of threats and our own weaknesses, and orient our companies and orient our leadership to make decisions based on facts rather than on emotion, or just that we've always done it that way or anything of that nature. Additionally, obviously, it's good business to look at the things from the perspective of your customer. We go take that a step further. We look at things from the perspective of our competitors. We assess threats constantly, and we try to be in front of those threats. We don't get behind them. So yes, there is a military sniper hiding in the bushes. He's outlined so you can help find him. But the idea is that we get further along in the process, the OODA loop, if we orient ourselves to fit into the observations that we make. Go ahead. I don't have the ability to push the button and make a slide change.
I'm getting there. Sorry,
Okay.
my mouse work is, it's
Cool.
5 o'clock. I do want to just call special attention to that. As a rule, each decision must be based on evidence. If you don't have evidence but you have a gut feel, because your gut isn't always wrong, go get some evidence. You can say what would match this, and then your gut might tell you that you're wrong. In marketing, we call that A/B testing. I'm going to try one way, I'm going to try the other way because I've got some evidence here telling me this. I'm going to go and prove myself right or wrong. You might prove yourself right that you indeed do need a chinking machine. Or you might say, I've got a really great chinker on my team, and if I gave him that machine, it would slow him down. You're going to get the evidence one way or the other.
I'm going to let you read through this because it's running long and I don't want to lose time at the end to hear input. Deciding, we kind of take that for granted. Sometimes most appropriate course of actions do nothing. We're all guilty of analyzing till we're paralyzed. Sometimes we have to remember that perfection is often the enemy of progress. If we wait till everything's perfect, we'll never take a shot. It just won't happen. And sometimes that final decision is just to wait or not to do something. No can be a decision. That's a legitimate decision. But especially in times of crisis, COVID reminded us, if we listen to all these outside influences and let our customers be confused and our employees and their families confused, someone has to step up and be the leader. Someone has to decide. So that's why we started using the OODA loop. Go ahead. You can, again, read faster than I can. I've used this analogy sometimes, and the action part of it for me, I love hearing manufacturers talk about these huge warehouses and huge assembly lines and huge changes and huge results. And then I hear that they had a meeting that lasted, more than 30 seconds, and I'm like jealous because I can't get my crews to stand still. We just don't have the ability to have meetings. We have to break things down into communication that can be done quickly. Decisions have to be made quickly in our world. One advantage of being a small business, in my opinion, is the ability to see yourself as piloting a kayak rather than driving the Queen Mary. Sometimes a good idea can get lost through the multiple layers of all the organization. Well, we're a small company. We can observe, orient ourselves to it, make decisions, and act on those decisions quickly. Much like a kayak person, your bottom is right there in the water. If you make a decision, you know right away if it's good or bad, and you're going to probably get wet. But you can also respond in markets that don't allow other companies to be as responsive. And if the cost of failure is very high, we're going to slow down and take a lot longer to make that decision. But as a small company, you're driving a kayak. You're not driving the Queen Mary and trying to parallel park a battleship. We can make decisions, try them. Again, sometimes it's yes, sometimes no, sometimes the answer is wait, but we can jump back into it pretty quickly. Go ahead, Bruce.
One thing too that we found is that, we all want to act. I think that's, and because we feel like there's going to be progress. One thing that when we've skipped the observe and the orient, we end up not having a lot of conviction in our action. And then somebody from leadership says, well, why are you doing that? And then you look stupid and you say, well, I don't really know why we're doing that. We thought it was a good idea, but we thought this slow down to speed up, right? So if you do the observe and the orient, then you can act with conviction and you know why you're doing what you're doing. I don't know, we've messed that up a lot and we're trying to do that less. And that comes down to documenting the rationale for decisions so that everyone knows why we made a decision one way or the other. And so that takes some time, but it's worth it so that everyone knows. And then when in our lives, say, well, here's where we started, the rationale. What, am I freezing?
Yeah, I was like, we got a weird techno concert for just a few seconds there. I don't know.
Oh, crap, it says low system resources. Anyway, I'll shut up.
Okay.
I like the input, thank you. The reason we call this a loop is that unlike a linear relationship where we try something and we experience it once, the trick to making the loop work in your advantage is to realize that once you try something and you observe what's happened, you can then feed the information back into the loop and start over again and refine the process. It's not just a one and done. Much like Chris talked about a marketing decision. I've seen people just get some idea for marketing. I'm just going to buy 1 million, I don't know, pencils and have my company's name put on them, or I'm going to buy a TV spot, whatever. But they're not orienting themselves to the appropriate markets. They're not watching to see if there are results from it. They just decide to act and hope that it works. And the lessons that they learn or don't learn are lost. So in our loop, because you're again paddling a kayak and you're small and you're nimble and you're agile, we can try things on a small scale, learn from them and plug them back in. If you plug those results back into the observation stage, it becomes a loop that just refines itself. And it truly does allow us to learn from our mistakes. The analogy I made was the Bill Murray in the movie Groundhog Day. So, if you try something and you've experienced this before and you learn from it and plug it back in and try it differently, you can refine your own systems. Go ahead. I'm going to real quickly go through 9 areas that my company used this OODA loop concept, just to show you how we're applying it and maybe see it in practice. On a personal note, it's really uncomfortable for me to talk about my company. We're just an ordinary company, just like anyone here. In fact, I bet I could learn more from listening to you than you're going to learn from me. It's just, we've been around 29 years. We've, I think, had the opportunity to make more mistakes. I started the company in 1993. So I've made more stupid mistakes and bruised and lost money and got beat up more often than maybe some of the other companies that haven't been around as long. So if I'm real tentative about talking about my company, it worries me because, of course, no company wants to give away competitive advantage, but I'm pretty free with information. If you call me and need help over the phone, I can coach people. I'm very open with what we're doing and how we charge and how it's done. In something that's going to live forever on the internet somewhere, I'm a little more reserved. But giving away competitive information isn't really the fear here as much as, for me, I don't want to create an environment of comparison. I just told you, Mark's knocking out twice the production that we are with our blasting. We've been doing this for 29 years. I thought we had it pretty well dialed in. I learned something last week talking to Mark. So I'm going to be candid and briefly go through what we're doing, and you can steal ideas or you can look at them and say, oh, it's stupid, it's a waste of time. Maybe I'll save you from making some bad choices too. We have an increased focus. We're making a specific attempt in our company, and we have been over the last couple of years, to adopt the lean and 5S strategies that we keep referring to. If you're not familiar with those, get a hold of, like I said, get a hold of Carice and get acquainted with those. I don't want to go into it, but anything we can do to speed up the process, make it more lean, cut out the waste, shorten the time the processes take, that's where we're applying our OODA loop. Go ahead. We are measuring and tracking our finances even tighter than we were before. We are an open book management company. We actually train our team members to understand how to read a balance sheet and understand where the money goes and how it processes through. I know that it takes a while to get to that point, and maybe that's not a good fit for everybody else, but we're constantly trying to break that information down into really simple thumbnail blocks of information that we can communicate with the workers. So even the dumbest worker, if we had one, our guys are great, but if we ever hire a really stupid worker, they'll be able to keep up. One of the tools we developed is what we call our now schedule. I've got one sitting on my desk. I keep it pretty close. We just have a summarized place, one piece of paper that lists every job that we have in the process, where we are, where it's located, who they are, how many hours it's going to take to drive to it, how many days we're going to be on it, and I keep a running total of how much business is coming through. In our case, we're located in Ohio, but we operate in a 14-state region with multiple teams. In this part of the country, we only have 157 days to do exterior work, and most of our work is exterior. So out of that 157 days, I'm sitting here, and right now it's May 6th. We've sold 104 of those days. I know that. So now it's time to start not worrying whether we're going to fill the season, but figuring out, when do we have more people? How do we split the people we have into yet another team? At what point do we make that decision? How do we make it work? Do we raise our prices so we can just comfortably fill the time that we have available? All those metrics are tracked, and we do it by basically putting on one piece of paper. All the work, the time, the commitments that we have can be seen at a quick glance. I don't have real sophisticated computer help, so I kind of do things off the back of a piece of paper, and it travels with me, and my guys can see what's going on.
Our inventory control system at Sashco lives on whiteboards all. And when you come to Business Focus, you'll see that. We're big fans of whiteboards around here. Everybody can see it. Anybody can use it. You don't have to have, if a computer goes down, whiteboard doesn't.
My whiteboard's 4 by 6 feet. I bet my whiteboard's bigger than your whiteboard.
I bet you we have more.
We do.
Right.
My work's done in the field. I'm working out of a briefcase or off the front of my car. So
right.
It's a different world.
Yours is a clipboard, not necessarily a whiteboard, right?
We have systems. No, it's whiteboards in the office on the wall to keep things in one place.
Yep.
But everybody has their own systems. And I'm not saying one's better than another. Have a system. Sure, have a system. So we're watching those numbers come through in real time. And interestingly for us, our crews love sports. They're competitive by nature. So once they understand that we're watching, we're measuring, we're working together towards something, we haven't had a real hard time getting buy-in. Making critical decisions like adding staff, adding equipment, when to buy the next truck. That's stuff that if you're just doing it by the seat of your pants and not strategically, sooner or later it's going to hurt. So we watch everything, measure it, and try to keep up with it. We use what we call an after-action report. We can talk about that if you want to, but the after-action report is just a piece of paper that's basically a profit loss statement. The team leader in the field fills in how many buckets, how much time, he knows the budget. Before he turns it into me, he knows if we made money or not. So these are really simple sheets that we just develop and we use. We're relatively small. We'll handle less than 100 projects in a year, typically on a 4-man crew. I look at the company in 4-man crews, kind of each one has to be a standalone. So we can do things with paper and pencil that aren't Sashco's order of magnitude for computer assist. I'd love to be able to do it. I'm just not really a computer guy. So we just make things work.
Okay. I really love that the after action report is not filled out by Wayne.
No.
That is really important because if it was, ownership would be a deal. So if since they fill it out, that's a critical difference. So I don't want to, that's an important thing I think to highlight.
Yeah, okay, thank you. It works for us. Next slide, please. Trying to get you guys back. I took too much time here. I'm trying to speed it up. The strategies that the loop identifies, we looked at the numbers, and in our case with the COVID thing, we figured rather than adding people right now, we went back and upped the compensation of our loyal staff, people that stuck with us. We have, we had some employees from last year who determined that under the current circumstances, it's more economically feasible to sit at home and do nothing and collect whatever benefits you can. So we actually have really loyal employees. We gave them all raises in a time when a lot of people were cutting back. This was a little graphic that I think Carice or someone added. The only thing I would change to it is I put on retention, I just put a little box up there that said referrals. You know, we hope to get the referrals and then plug those back into the hire system because we've always done better getting referrals from our workers than we are just trying to go out to the open marketplace.
Agree. Sashco incentivizes referrals.
Oh yeah. I know what it costs. I track everything. I measure everything. I know what it costs to have ads running and the time it takes. I can tell you how much it costs to train someone. I know what the decrease in productivity and throughput on our systems when we have new people, like at the beginning of a season, we'll typically we'll start 5 or 6 new guys at once and the productivity numbers fall off the chart. So for us, in this case, under the COVID situation, we've decided to hold off hiring people until our now schedule says we're going to have somebody, and I can tell you when that will be, and we'll start hiring incrementally as we need them, instead of just assuming that more employees is going to be more money, because we found we can make more profit on fewer employees by saving money back in the lean and 5S strategies. And for me, $1 saved is really about $1.25 because the money that we save are after-tax savings. I have to sell more work and pay tax on the income or on the profits on incoming work, I can actually benefit the company greater by straightening out what we're doing and being more streamlined and less waste. And that kind of drives what we do. But we increased our pay structure for our staff. That was a move we made. Go ahead.
Yep.
We implemented an incentive plan based on revenue. We track 5S and lean statistics, and we watch those numbers just the way it's taught at zero failures. But in the everyday, as I said before, it's really difficult for us to even get people to stop. They're not all coming through the warehouse on the same day. People are in the field, they're moving, it's so fluid that we can't, unless we set aside a costly amount of time out of that 157 days to meet. I know what that meeting cost me by the minute. I know what my labor costs are. It's pretty easy to calculate. We have to find things that are really communicated easily. So in our case, we, after COVID, we still track our 5S savings. We'll still track things just the way we were. But we moved our profit sharing plan, which we've always had. It's just been kind of hard for people to relate to. Initially, our profit sharing plan banked money to pay them in the off season, and we lost all the motivation of them getting money in their hands except once a year. And then by timing it close to Christmas, it was usually gone before the ink was dry on the check. When we had complicated incentive plans, that profit sharing wasn't really in their mind every second of the day, it hurt us. So we started running those profit sharing numbers based on just gross sales, because that's information that we can reveal to our employees. They are under a pretty strict non-disclosure, non-compete agreement, and they can track the sales right off the job sheets in the field. They know that if we stay on a job an extra day, it's going to cost us this amount of money, and they want to see profit because they know based on how much volume comes through the company, the more revenue, the bigger the bonus. And it's pretty simple to do. I think Carice mentioned visualization. In our case, what we're doing and what's worked best for us, in addition to any financial compensation being more often than once a year or once a quarter, these guys, we've put a picture of a visualized reward out there for them. This year, they're working for towards a trip in the off season. Now, we've done this before. Our workers have come back and said, you know, that was the most meaningful thing you've ever done was send us to Mexico or send us to wherever we went. They would never have done this on their own. And it's an opportunity to build loyalty in their minds and give them a real valuable experience that they're not going to probably replicate themselves. So what we've done on this year's profit sharing, we've developed a bracketed set of trips, and they're working towards a trip. If they're hitting their numbers about where we normally would hit them, that trip's going to be stateside in Florida. Their families and them, they'll go down and we'll pay to send them to Florida, which when you live in Ohio and it's winter, that's kind of a big deal. But then incrementally, the better trips or the different trips, they're either going to be in the Caribbean at an inclusive, which we've done before, and it works very well for us, or if they can double business, they're going to Hawaii. Now, that sounds really grandiose, but if you work the numbers and you understand what your fixed costs are, these saving steps and the added incentive of working faster and smarter and not having recalls or callbacks, we're talking huge profit margins because the fixed costs are already accounted for in the system. So we have an incentive plan that's based on revenue. And this year we've gone back to what's worked well for us in the past. We're awarding trips. It's funded by our savings, so it's not like a big out-of-pocket thing. We'll easily be able to afford that. We did find a couple of interesting things in the past. We found that employees that are behind on child support cannot get a passport, so they had a hard time going on these trips sometimes. But working around the travel restrictions that might still be in place, we want them to know we're paying them well. They're being paid very well, but as they save us money, they can visualize being on a beach. Families, we include, this is a family thing. Couples go to the resorts. We want to have buy-in at home. And you're going to travel, you're going to be away from your family, but we've got something planned in the off season that's really something visualized. You can visualize.
We sent Scott to Arizona.
Yes, I saw his tan. Next slide, please. And stop me if I'm over time because I know I've burned up all mine. I will stop whenever you tell me. I'm almost done anyway with this. We during COVID we offered to freeze prices for the customers that weren't sure. Typically, our quotes are good for 30 days. And we just went back and said, look, it's confusing. We don't know if you're going to have a job next year, whatever. We're going to honor this. We're in this together. It helped us with our being consistent with our way of selling, which is whatever a high pressure approach is, we work to be the opposite. We actually put effort into sales, trying to dissuade the customer from using us. And it's paying huge dividends. That sounds counterintuitive, I know, but we will meet with people. We genuinely care about their home and about their experience. We'll tell them how to do it for themselves and coach them at no charge if they want to tackle this. People seem to appreciate our honesty in doing that. They're expecting a hard sell. We do the opposite. We'll try to talk them out of doing it. We'll give them options. When they hire us, they want us, and they'll pay a premium for that. So for us, the low pressure sales include, in our case, freezing prices and helping customers to feel like they weren't being rushed to spend money in a really uncertain time period. Next slide. Almost done here, guys. You're really good listeners. We realigned our financial benchmarks based on what we now consider 2020 to be our worst year ever. We looked real hard at our numbers and amortized cost over the number of days we have. We know absolutely if we had another year like last year that we're going to be okay. We set our pricing and our schedule based on using 2020 as a model, because for us it was statistically the worst year ever. That's kind of leads us into another topic that we're not going to get into tonight. There's just not enough time, but it is critical to know your critical numbers. Those benchmark numbers, if you're pricing and you don't know what it costs for you to do the operations and you don't know how to make decisions based on the financial records coming through your company, you need to get help. If you can't appear on Shark Tank tonight and defend your numbers, or if you don't know your numbers, you're really sailing out there without a map. Again, I would encourage you to get some help or get to CF or something. Critical numbers is just like another topic, and we could spend a lot of time. We do spend a lot of time with that as zero focus business, or zero failure business focus. Sorry. Okay, I think I'm almost done. We've got one more here, at least one more, but staying committed to zero debt. This is just a personal thing with me. I know the world doesn't need two Dave Ramseys, so I'm not really going to drill down on this too deep, but our personal conviction is that we have an obligation to our employees to be financially and fiscally responsible. We get people from the trades that tell me horror stories about the boss getting paid and them not being able to cash their paychecks. They have to, fight to get paid, and he's buying new jet skis and driving a nice truck. And it just doesn't create the kind of environment that we want as we're fostering career positions. We don't just want people to come in and work for a paycheck. We want to be able to treat them like owners. We expect them to act like owners, and we compensate them accordingly. So one of the tools that we use, and it took a very long time to get here. I'm not saying this is right for everyone. I'm just telling you how we think about it. We made a conscious effort to slowly, over time, make sure that we weren't acquiring debt. And that's kind of a nutshell thing. Call me on the phone, I'll tell you specifically what our beliefs are. But nonetheless, in the case of business, if you can minimize debt, you just have more choices and more flexibility and more protection in a COVID kind of environment. COVID hit us just like it did everybody that's watching this video. In our case, we keep 12 months of operating revenue in the bank. My employees know that we're banked out for 12 months of cash sitting in an account. Their jobs are safe. Their spouses are not worried. They can relax. We can focus on doing things well. We can take the jobs that are going to be profitable and not just have to take jobs to get the cash to pay the payroll this week to get to the next job. It's just an entirely different environment. I would encourage you to think about the concept of minimizing your debt and eventually eliminating your debt. The Dave Ramsey stuff is great for personal finance, and I'm generally pretty much in agreement with what he has to say. Financial Peace University is a great investment of your time, and I recommend that on the personal side. Business finance is basically an extension of your personal beliefs. So whatever your personal beliefs are with finance, I would suggest you apply those financial decisions back into the OODA loop and watch what's going on. Watch those numbers come into your company. See what happens when you pay people more money or less money or make decisions. Figure out where you fit into that OODA loop. Try some things. Get yourself out of them if they don't work. Feed the information from the experience back in and ride that loop around. We did have an unusual occurrence this year, the PPP financing, which I assume most people, I don't know, I'm assuming most people took advantage of it. We're committed to not having debt, so taking a loan was a kind of a difficult decision. We opened the bank account specifically for the PPP money. We took the loan, we parked it in the bank account, we didn't touch it. Came time to give it back or try to qualify for a forgiveness. That's a whole nother matter. So it is, and I mention this just to say it is possible to operate a company that's not heavily indebted. And in times of crisis management, like COVID, that will give you some breathing room and just really opens up your options. Okay, next and last slide, I promise, because I'm talking too much. I apologize for that. Scaling a workflow. We watched those numbers. We fed the information back into the loop. We actually determined that in our case right now, we could cut the size of the number of employees on our crews and be more profitable in some cases. We did that by watching the productivity on those after action reports. And we just found that we kind of found ourselves in this mindset that bigger is better and more people is always going to be more profitable. And you got to be in more states and you got to be driving bigger, faster trucks. But COVID forced us to kind of rethink it. And we found in our case, by cutting out the waste, we could get more done with fewer people on payroll. So it allowed us some flexibility in terms of how many people to bring back, how many people to add. So we're scaling our workflow and the kinds of jobs we take. Somebody mentioned chink pump. I think Chris mentioned chink pump. We sold our chink pump because although it's a great idea, we just aren't making enough money doing the work the chink pump was doing. We can either do it a different way, or in our case, we looked at things that weren't producing revenue that we thought was appropriate, and we started subcontracting to other people and feeding work to them. So it helped everybody. It was kind of a win-win. I'll close on one thing here. I had an interesting phone call 2 days ago, and this is just another real quick OODA example. One of our competitors, a friend of mine, but a competitor called and he says, "Man, are you rained out?" I said, "Well, no, we're not." He said, "It's raining." I said, "Yeah, it's when we do our washing." The way this worked for us, washing houses, for me personally, was a really difficult thing to sell because we're out there pushing an advanced finished product that is basically lower maintenance than the stuff they had before. And in the same breath, I'm supposed to talk to them about our maintenance programs and washing houses and keeping up on it. It presented kind of a problem. Also, we couldn't charge as much money for doing routine maintenance program work, washing or what have you, as we could the new jobs flying through. But I don't want to leave that part of the market unserviced because we have commitments to help people. So for us, we looked at the OODA process. First of all, we found out we don't need 4 people to wash a house. We can send 2 people. And then we figured out that the only down days we really had were rain days. And if we amp up our chemical the right way, I'm not going to have my guys working in thunderstorms, but if it's been raining and it's too wet to strip, too wet to blast, and too wet to stain, those are the days we're out doing the relatively lower profit margin preventative maintenance stuff like washing houses. And I can do that with fewer people and we're still going to make the normal rates. So we made changes. He was surprised that we weren't sitting on our hands somewhere. No, we're out washing houses. If it rains tomorrow, we'll just take a couple houses off our to-do list and we tell them when it rains, we'll be there to clean it. So that's just a change that we had to solve a problem. So we used the OODA loop to kind of help guide us through that. I hope the OODA loop is beneficial to you all. I'm going to turn it back to Carice because she's in charge of everything, time and everything else, but you've been a good audience and thank you. My number's there. That's my personal cell. I don't just willy-nilly give that out to people, but if I can help any contractors, call me. I'm on Eastern time, but call me anytime and I'll do whatever I can to help.
I can attest to Wayne sending emails and texts at like 2 o'clock in the morning. So I've been the recipient on some occasions. I'd also like everybody to remember that he said that I'm in charge of everything.
In charge of everything.
At least when things go right. Now, when they go wrong, you can talk to Nick. Just so we're aware. So there was one question that came up, and then I want you guys feel free to unmute and ask questions and or this is open forum, things that you guys are measuring. Jared asked, what are some examples of things everyone here tracks? They track how long it takes to peel a log. Excellent. And then I guess my question for you, Jared, would be, now that you're tracking how long it takes to peel a log, have you found some ways to make that faster, do it better? What are you doing with what you're tracking? Have you implemented the OODA loop in order to start to identify some improvements there? Also, I wanted to point out everybody gets a trophy for attending today. This is a virtual trophy. So I know you're not all millennials, but everybody needs a trophy sometimes. So what are you guys tracking?
Hey, Chris. This is Jared.
Hey, Jared.
How's it going?
Pretty good.
So yeah, we've been tracking. I guess we just started tracking billing logs last year, and it's kind of been one of our ongoing things that we're working on changing and improving the processes that we use to bill logs, because we do log home maintenance, but we also bill log home, and so but we've utilized the measurements on our prep work on walls, like you guys were talking about, on the stain. And it's just really hard I can't imagine doing it without the numbers, having metrics to back it up. And a side note, we're all millennials here, and that's my preferred hire.
Because they like to have ownership. That's kind of what I've found too. I'm on the cusp. I'm technically a Gen Xer, but millennials, they want to know why. But once they know their why, man, they are in it to win it.
I have a question for everybody. With the past Zoom meetings and everything, everybody, we're talking about efficiencies and stuff. What, don't answer if you don't want to, but what profit margins are you shooting for? Like, what's the percentage? If you're the owner not doing the work, like, what are you looking for?
As much as we can get, is that a valid answer?
Like 20, 30%? Like, what's industry standard, would you say?
I would say there is no industry standard because the definition is so vague. When I talk to people, and that's a great question, and it's important, but we can go through levels to get to the answer. The first question I have is the owner being paid? Surprisingly, people talk about profit margin and the owner is just taking what's left over at the end of the day. So we operate from a position of every position being funded, whether that's me in that chair or someone that we have to hire to do my job. Every position is fully funded before we talk about profit. So what we're creating is essentially a system-driven operation that we can franchise if we chose to. We can replicate and scale up with ease because the funding and the systems are in place. So if you're operating from the premise that every person in that company is being properly paid and your bills are under control, and then you're looking at what we would refer to as genuine profit, yeah, there's no industry standard, but I think the people I've talked to, it's not unusual to hear 30, 40, 50, maybe sometimes 60%, but I'm also not qualifying with them opening their books to see if they're being exactly honest with us. So I don't know if that helps or dodges the question, but the main point is we got to fund the positions and run it like a legitimate business before we can have profit. And then for a lot of people, you reach a point where profit avoidance is actually a strategy. We will reinvest back into the company. We buy assets purposely to have less taxable profit to deal with at the end of the year. So I'm not sure if that's factored into your question, but there's a certain critical point where profit can be advantageously avoided in terms of accounting.
Tax burden. Yeah.
Tax burden. There you go.
Got it.
We can liquidate and get the cash back out pretty quick. But
well, in case it's helpful for anybody, like we, with depreciation added back in, with like an officer salary and all that, like we shoot for 25 to 30. So just in case anybody's ballparking it, I guess.
Yeah, that's a good range.
You guys can get Wayne's new book, which is called How to Avoid Profit Like the Plague.
The new Amazon.
Yeah.
I'm writing it in my jail cell, and then when I get out,
And we're in a totally different business here, manufacturing. So I'll just tell you, we only sell value. That's my answer. That's me beating around the bush on profit margins. So, but I would bet that our profit margins are probably double that of, say, DAP, but we don't have anywhere near the distribution of DAP. So, by percentage, you could say that, but certainly not by gross profit.
we're, and I'm sure other people have, similar objectives. When I deal with the issue of profit, I'm looking at impacting the lives of our team members and their families. And we have things we want to do with that money. So the goal for us is to fully fund the positions, treat people fairly, pay them the living wage, and give them a future. And hopefully they're going to make this a career. So we plow a lot of money back into charitable causes. We plow a lot of money back into our employees. There's a certain point where you just don't really need a lot. And where do you park cash right now? Well, I'd rather invest in the lives of the people that make the money for us and grow my business than I would have everything wrapped up in a market that could evaporate overnight. I'm kind of a control freak.
Dogecoin's looking pretty good though, right?
I'm just going to call out one more thing here quickly, and then we're going to call it a night. Alicia, thank you so much for bringing up and calling out Nick for saying, our automatic response is defensiveness. Our crew, our team members, my automatic response, and Nick knows this better than anybody else, is defensiveness. He's very patient with me. And I appreciate when people say, look, you did a great job. You did fine, but there's room for improvement. So go find it. It's a good ownership mindset when somebody gets defensive about their work, because it means that they care about what they're doing. So figuring out how to channel that into improvements is going to be, you found somebody who wants to do a good job. That's a good thing. Let's get them doing an even better job.
Yeah, I think too, like, there's a CYA culture, and it's natural to human nature, right? To just try to cover yourself, protect yourself. And so I think it's important to, we don't get rid of that by simply saying don't have that culture. You need a bigger yes to get rid of that no, I guess. You need a bigger goal to go after. And so I think there was a lot of talk early on when we started making things visible to red is good, and to calling out that what is going to happen is things are going to be more visible than they ever have been. And it's natural to feel like a little bit unnerved by that, because guess what? For the first time, they may be seeing the results of their work, and they've never thought about it before. And so it's kind of an unnerving experience. But once you get over that, people want to win. Mm-hmm. And if you're not measuring it and it's not visible, they go home every day and they don't know. And that sucks. I mean, you want to watch a football game, and at the end you say, well, thanks everyone. We don't know what the score was. We'll see you later, and we want to know what the score was, and we want to win. And just, leading people through that to get out of a CYA culture and into a continuous improvement culture.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, so my question then, we tried to make things visible, and we showed them how many hours they had on a job and that type of stuff. And then it was like, if they didn't come within that, then they started blaming. Oh, well, Blake didn't put enough hours in. Oh, this is a lot harder. Or well, this happened here. And it's like, okay, yeah, maybe Blake didn't put enough hours in. So what? So it backfired on us, and we didn't know how to make it improve, because it was just, everything went downhill when we gave them visibility. So we just stopped. So I don't know. We need some help in that realm.
We all do, Alicia, because it does take, like I said, that culture change that we had to implement really mattered. And that started with, us having to take ownership of our own. I did not do this as well as I should have, but I think that it has more to do with how I did it, not necessarily me and the skills that I have. So really doing a lot of process maps, which take time. And Wayne, you talked about, time is money. I don't have a ton of time to take guys off of the job site to do that. So perhaps better to do those kinds of things in the winter time and get everybody more excited about it. I don't know when your guys leave, Alicia, but finding time to get that all out on the table and get everybody's buy-in and go through a process step by step and say, well, where could we have improved? And sometimes you're just going to find people don't want to improve.
Yeah, there is that. I mean, I do think that if you're having so much trouble, there can be personnel issues, but also I do think it's really important to have, and it's not everybody, but to have the people that are going to be accountable to that. You do a back and forth to goal set together.
Mhm.
Okay. And so that's can kind of be an issue, right? Of, okay, well, Blake set the goal, and then, well, you gave me this goal, and man, you really suck at goal setting because this isn't possible. And so having that upfront negotiation to say, all right, well, this is what we've done in the past. What do you think a good goal would be? And we are a continuous improvement culture. Like we are improving all the time. So backwards isn't an option. Right. So I do think if you get that goal setting, then they don't really have any place to point the finger but themselves. And that's not a very fun thing to do. So I don't know, Wayne, do you have a thought on that?
Well, we make a real distinction of criticizing the system and not the person in that chair. We borrow the technique from education that deals with image-based criticism versus problem-based. So we're pretty careful to target our comments and our observations at the system and solicit them to help fix the system. And it might be Blake, I don't know what Blake's role is, but it might be Blake was in that chair when that decision was made, but let's fix the system so that whomever is in that chair, we collectively can get better. And we're real careful and sensitive about image-based criticism. I serve what I call a criticism sandwich, which is essentially find something they're doing right, make sure you recognize it, hit them with the criticism, but then hit them again with something else they're doing right. I've had some field team leaders that like to serve the sandwich open face, and it just doesn't build the cohesive teams that we need, especially when they're on the road traveling all the time. So those two things, criticize the system and solicit them to help you fix it and take it off of them as a person, it just blunts any criticism that way. Now, on the after action report, on the back side of that sheet is a place for the team leader to write good or bad comments or with problems with the system, problems with equipment, problems with people. Because if he doesn't get that out of his system, he's going to blow up somewhere and I'm going to lose a good employee. So they make notes in real time as it happens. When I get those sheets back in, I turn them over and I see what's going on with problems. I start trying to fix them. When it's review time, then my job is really easy. I just read off the back of the sheet and build my review sheets. So if that helps a little bit, be careful about image-based. If they're feeling defensive, it might be that maybe a criticism sandwich and it needs to be served and deal with the system and not the person. Ultimately, it's my fault. That's really, I spend a lot of time saying that. I have no problem apologizing to my workers. If this took too long, I didn't do my job building the system right. Let me fix it. Well, how do you think I should fix it? So I have no problem taking blame because I'm usually at fault somewhere and I don't mind admitting it. I can't see anybody else on my screen right now, so I have no idea what's going on.
I know. Any other questions from anybody?
Yeah, can I jump in there real quick, Chris?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to address what was just asked about, the if the employees aren't meeting the hours set as goals, I do the exact same thing Wayne does. I've made mistakes. I bid the job wrong myself too. But one of the things we've done is we do, like, I'm just going to use blasting again, for example, because all of this stuff is what drove us to get to the point where we have the proper equipment and everything else so that they can achieve that. So we have the guys every so often do a timed test blast. How long does it take to do 100 square feet? And so when they come back and say, well, we didn't meet our goals or something like that, it's pretty easy to say, well, here's proof that you did, and you know what it felt like to do that. So what was the problem that caused you to not be able to meet your goals? I forgot everything else I was going to say, so I'll stop there.
That's good, Mark, and it's relevant. I think also, Alicia, something I was thinking of, I at the beginning of this talked about just starting to measure numbers. Just because you know what those numbers might be doesn't mean that your team understands them and knows what they are. And so setting baselines. We're going to practice measuring. We're going to start tracking this. And your team starts to understand that a little bit more. And they start to make it a little bit more of a competition with themselves, rather than you coming out and saying, well, this is what our rate was in the past. We need to improve. When you allow them in on the work that it takes to set the baseline, and you don't attach any improvement to it to start with, they'll naturally go that way.
Do you guys like vary your, predictions of how many square feet you're going to blast job to job? Because for us, like, every job is a bit different, like, it's kind of hard to standardize, the chinking, sanding, blasting, all of that.
It actually isn't all that hard to standardize it, but you kind of got to, you'll develop that experience where you can just look at a job and tell whether it's going to be harder or take longer or go faster or whatever. But to be honest with you, I actually bid a job on a lower average speed. I know what my max speeds are. Like, I've told Wayne, I've actually hit 1,000 square feet an hour before, but that's extremely rare, but I know what my average square footage is, and I bid the job lower than that. So one of the things I want to say is we track literally everything. We track everything we do, we track, and that came from Wayne. So you got to track it. You got to know where you're at. I've talked to many blasters that have no idea how fast they're blasting per square, how many square feet per hour. You have to know that.
Yeah. So what market, one thing that we do, and it's very similar, is in our budget process, in the annual, we go through, well, we're going to grow this much, and we break down that growth into key initiatives. But we also have a headwinds column. We will lose customers, i.e., there will be a house that's way harder to blast than you thought and takes you longer. That's your worst house of the year. And so building in some level of headwinds into your projections, whether it's at the job level or whether it's at the year, will provide some, okay, well, we can still make a profit when we ran into that, because we plan for it.
I just totally missed the last part of what you said, Nick. You're going to have to send out an email to everybody. I think what he's saying is that we do build in the lost business. The job that's going to cost more. Something's going to go bad. Nice, Nick. If only we were more profitable. Nick, a new computer. I'll talk to IT, who's out for 2 weeks, about that. So you have to build that into your plan. But yeah, you got to know your numbers in order to know what your average would even be in order to apply that to every job.
Yeah, I had an interesting thing even happen today. Chinking, and one of my guys texted me like, "What exactly do you figure each man should be able to get?" And I fired right back with the answer: how many feet? You got to know that.
Yeah.
I guess for us, like, especially with the chinking, it's like every job is different, it's just too hard to, one job we might do 1.5 buckets a day, another we might do 5, it just varies so much. So we end up just kind of bidding more like per day. And you're right, like with experience, you can kind of just see, hey, this job's going to take 5 days or 4 days, and just kind of, we just boil it down that way, I guess.
Well, and Travis, what I tell you on that is, if one job takes doing those, as Wayne calls them, the after action report on a job that takes, you do 1.5 buckets in a day, and another one you do 5 in a day, write down the notes about what happened on those jobs.
Right.
And start to see
Well,
if
let
you
me
can
ask
find
you,
friends,
let me ask you why you're looking at it as a bucket per day instead of a foot. How long does it take a guy to tool a foot? Because the width of the joint and the amount of product you're going to use radically changes, but the speed in which they're tooling or applying it should be consistent.
Well, it kind of depends. Like, are we doing around trim? Are we doing notches? Are we doing flyaways? Are we doing checks? Just kind of too many variables, is what I've found. It's not like installing flooring or something fairly the same, every job to job. That's why we never bid per foot, it's just kind of too difficult, I guess.
Everything I do is per foot, and I factor in all those wraps, rakes, everything. And again, you got to know what your footage speed is on all of those different places to factor that in.
And Travis, you will feel like you are going to die in tedium hell when you
Yeah, that's where I'm at.
stuff.
Sounds like a lot of work.
Well,
I'm like, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. I felt that way myself before. Is holy crap, am I really having to track all this little stuff? And
Yeah.
you learn some of it is throwaway, but some of it is very valuable, and really drive some improvement. So it does early on. It's like, holy crap, I can't focus on that. It's going to drive you nuts.
Here's another thing I'm going to throw out there, and this again came from Wayne's advice. I've got a business manager now who is extremely good with Excel sheets. I'm not. And so he developed an Excel spreadsheet for me that all I got to do is input the numbers, and all the formulas, everything are built in, that I know exactly how many hours we're projecting should take to do anything per employee. So it's a simple tool that I don't have to understand and go back through and recalculate everything. But when I input the footage numbers, it gives me all the information I need.
Yes, very good, Nick. Always partner together with a nerd. Mark.
Yeah. Yes.
You've
Carlos
talked about
is my
how that's
nerd. Carlos
changed
is my
your
nerd. So
business.
when he's watching this here, kudos to Carlos.
All right, I'm sorry, but we got to call it a night. It's 6:30 my time, which means it's 8:30 on the East Coast. If you have other questions, you have our numbers there. Give us a call, shoot us an email. We're happy to, even if it is just a sounding board, sometimes having other people who are doing the same thing to helping you talk through it is helpful. So send us those questions, and we'll have conversations with y'all. But I want to say thank you for being here. I hope you guys learned. I hope we're continuing to make our businesses better, whatever size they are. So thanks for joining us, everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Bye, all.
Thanks, everybody.